Hello. Today I'll be looking into the life and works of Sam Phillips from not only a musical perspective, but a sociological one. But before we can dissect his work, we have to examine two factors of his childhood that affected not only his musical tastes, but his political views. Sam's parents owned the farms which Sam worked on as a child. Astonishingly for the time, black and white workers laboured alongside each other in the fields. Sam often heard the black workers singing whilst he worked, which must have caught his musical ear. Whilst born into a Methodist family, from 16 he attended a Baptist church and was immediately astonished and enthralled by how they praised the same God. He said, and I quote, "I, being Sam Phillips, found my family's Methodism insufficiently emotional and too formal. I would tell people, why doesn't our music sound that good in our church? I mean, hearing them was inspiring. You'd get happy. And although back then you were taught to look upon it as, well, those people were really getting with it. I felt like they were getting with it. In the right way. They were letting it all hang out. Wish I'd known that expression then. But you couldn't have used it, could you?" Before we continue, we must mention Sam's musicality. From a young age, Sam played the sousaphone, trombone and drums, and was the leader of the 72-piece band at his high school. There were three main factors that influenced the changing tide of American race relations. Firstly, after defeating fascism in Europe and Southeast Asia, African Americans felt that there was a hypocrisy between the idealism of fighting for democracy and equality whilst experiencing neither back home. The Second World War also brought a booming post-war economy and caused a migration to industrial cities. This boom brought black and white alike into the city of Memphis. The fact that they could casually observe one another led to increased exposure to the sounds of Black America. The final factor was the emergence of the Red Scare. There was no one more wary of the scare than President Truman, a fierce anti-communist who recognized that disenfranchisement could lead to a potential communist revolt. We see this in his enactment of the Marshall Plan, a loaning system designed to reinvigorate the ruined European economies at an quicker rate. Whilst his time in office wasn't without its controversies, Truman establishing the Congress of Racial Equality and addressing the NAACP National Conference did open the door for the expansion of rights for African Americans as a legitimate option. What was needed, however, wasn't quite yet a political push, but a culture shift to inspire the masses. Sam's big break came when he secured a position at the famous WREC radio station in Memphis, which had a predominantly white demographic, state-of-the-art equipment, and its own in-house swing band. Phillips' time at the studio helped equip him with the skills, experience, and money needed to invest in his own studio, the Memphis Recording Service. The studio attracted Joe Hill Lewis, a local blues singer who was a regular on Bill Street. Without his tenure at WREC, Sam would have never experienced Bill Street, the epicenter of African American culture in Memphis and home to many buskers, including the likes of B.B. King, Howling Wolf, and Ike Turner. This is where Elvis discovered blues music, which alongside country rounded out his rock and roll sound. Phillips's charisma, pragmatic nature, and ear for talent proved to be a winning formula and attracted scores of musicians who would revolutionize the music industry. He developed slapback delay by having one tape record a track and a playback from another tape, often just playing the vocals. The physical distance between the two would create just about enough latency to make the timbre sound thicker. He also developed distortion by quickly fixing Ike Turner's guitarist's amp with cardboard for Rocket 88 and embraced the sound it created in the final mix. Whilst Rocket 88 was not the first song to use distortion, it was the first one with commercial success. As you can see on screen, many of the blues musicians were emigrating from Memphis to Chicago. Economic pressures and the deteriorating relationship between Phillips and the Chess brothers forced Sam's hand into creating his own record label, Sun Records. Whilst he did record the $1 Million Quartet, consisting of Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins, the label's initial success only attracted larger labels with deeper pockets, and in 1955 Sam had to make a tough decision. The financial difficulties led Phillips to sell Elvis Presley's contract to RCA Records for an unprecedented sum of $35,000, equivalent to $300,000 today. Sadly, this would be the first of the million-dollar quartet to fall. In 1956, Carl Perkins got into a serious enough car crash that it derailed his rise to fame. In 1958, it was revealed to the public that Jerry Lee Lewis had married a 13-year-old girl, ruining his reputation until he revived his career with Mercury Records. And in that same year, Johnny Cash signed a lucrative deal with Columbia Records. With the quartet either out of the label or the public eye, Sun Records could not keep up the same success it had previously earned, being reduced to merely a regional label. By 1969, Sam Phillips sold Sun Records to Shelby Singleton, who rather unsurprisingly used the label as an opportunity to sell re-releases of the golden era of Sun Records. Here are some of the artists Sun Records had recorded according to the official Sun Records website. However, Sam was not a man to sit on his laurels, for in the same year Phillips sold the rights to Elvis Presley, he would establish one of the financially riskiest, progressive endeavours that, whilst not successful, would shift the tides decades down the line. In 1955, he established the US's first all-women's radio show. This was such a progressive idea that it was not until midway through the auditions that the women realised they were not competing for one solitary position. And make no mistake, it wasn't just an all-female lineup of hosts. Every executive position from the top down was run by a woman. For such a progressive idea, the show did indeed last for quite a while, closing its doors in 1973. This was incidentally 2 years after the National Press Club allowed for female members, something I'm sure W. Her contributed towards changing. For his works and achievements, Sam was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986, the Alabama Hall of Fame in 1987, the Blues Hall of Fame in 1998, the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2001, the Memphis Hall of Fame in 2012, and received a Grammy Lifetime Award in 1991, which is well deserved. By allowing anyone who had the talent to use his studio, he could galvanize the African American music of the blues with the European American music of country to create a brand new genre, and in turn the culture of rock and roll. His willingness to take risks and look adversity in the eye also allowed him to create new timbres and techniques only he truly could. His efforts allowed for the first push from segregation to suffrage for African Americans and gave women a foot in the door in the radio industry. His relentless pursuit for perfection and progress can be a lesson for us all.